Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to get into one of the most consequential decisions in modern American constitutional law. We're going to try and pin down the precise standard for when police officers can use deadly force to stop a fleeing suspect. This isn't just theory. It really all hinges on defining a reasonable seizure under the Fourth Amendment. It's about drawing a line between state power and an individual's life.
That line is everything, and our mission today is to trace how that line is moved, because you really can't understand the current rule without knowing where we came from. We have to start with the old common law rule, then look at the huge shift the Supreme Court made in Tennessee v. Garner back in 1985. That case gave us a really critical two-pronged test that we're going to break down element by element.
Okay, so before 1985, before Garner, law enforcement was working with a totally different standard. What was that prevailing rule, the one people call the common law rule?
Historically, the general rule, common law, was it was chillingly simple. Deadly force was allowed if it was necessary to arrest any fleeing felon.
Wait, any fleeing felon? That sounds incredibly broad. So if someone stole, I don't know, a horse and that was a felony, they could be shot while running away.
That's exactly right. And the history sort of explains the logic, even if it's, completely outdated now. At common law, almost all felonies were capital offenses. They were punishable by death. So the thinking went, if the state can execute the person later, using force to stop them from escaping now is sort of a down payment on that. Plus, felonies were usually very serious, violent crimes, and police didn't have modern firearms. Lethal force usually meant hand-to-hand, not shooting someone from 50 feet away. But by the time Garner got to the Supreme Court, those old justifications had just evaporated. The court pointed out two huge policy shifts. First, modern laws make a lot of nonviolent crimes. Felonies, certain property crimes, things that pose no physical threat. Second, technology. That's the big one. The handgun changed everything. It allows lethal force to be used from a distance, which makes the intrusion, literally taking a life, so much greater than the government's interest in just, catching a non-threatening suspect.
Okay, so let's unpack that. The court basically saw that the old rule was just. It was a dangerous anachronism. So if the common law rule is thrown out, what constitutional standard did the court create? How did they balance the government's need to apprehend someone against a person's fundamental right to live?
That balancing act gave us the modern rule, which we all now call the Garner standard. The court decided that using deadly force to prevent a fleeing suspect's escape is constitutionally unreasonable under the Fourth Amendment unless, and this is the key, unless both of the following elements are met.
Both of them?
Both. It's a two-part test. First, it must be necessary to prevent escape. And second, the officer must have probable cause of a significant threat. That means probable cause to believe the suspect poses a significant threat of death or serious physical injury to the officer or to others.
That is a much, much narrower standard. Let's see how this new, very strict rule applied to the case that created it. Let's analyze Tennessee v. Garner. First, what are the legally dispositive facts?
Okay, so the facts are pretty stark. It's late on a clear night in Memphis, around 10:45 p.m. Two officers, Hyman and Wright, get a prowler inside call. Officer Hyman goes around to the back of the house and he sees someone running across the yard. It's 15-year-old Edward Garner. He's described as young, slight, maybe 5'5".
Just a kid.
Yes. And Garner gets to a 6-foot chain-link fence and starts to climb. Now, Officer Hyman testified he saw no weapon. In fact, he was, quote, reasonably sure Garner was unarmed. He yells, "Police, halt!" But Garner keeps climbing. And that's when Hyman shot him in the back of the head, killing him.
And what was Garner suspected of?
Burglary. They found $10 on his body that was taken from the house.
Wow. Okay. That is a stark set of circumstances. So what was a core legal issue the Supreme Court had to decide?
The precise legal question was this. Does a state law that allows deadly force against a fleeing suspected felon, who is apparently unarmed and non-dangerous, violate the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable seizures?
And what rule of law did the court apply to answer that? Please state the full black letter rule and break it down into those testable elements you mentioned.
The rule is the Garner standard itself, the one the court creates in this very opinion. And again, it sets a really high bar. Deadly force is unreasonable unless it's necessary to prevent escape, and the officer has probable cause to believe the suspect poses a significant threat of death or serious physical injury. So the two elements you have to test are 1, necessity to prevent escape, and 2, probable cause of a significant threat. Is the suspect actually dangerous?
Thank you. Now, for the court's elemental analysis, we have to walk through this step by step because you said both elements have to be met for the shooting to be constitutional. So, how did the court apply that first element, necessity to prevent escape?
Right. So this part, it might actually surprise you. The court found this element was met. The sub-issue here is purely about the mechanics of the situation. Was shooting him the only way to stop him from getting away right then?
And the court said it was.
Yes. Officer Hyman testified he was convinced that if Garner made it over the fence, he would elude capture. No one was on the other side. That fence was his ticket out. So from a purely technical standpoint, the force was deemed necessary to achieve the seizure. So element 1 passes.
Understood. But that brings us to the second element, probable cause of significant threat. This seems to be where the whole case turns, right?
Absolutely. This element failed, and it failed completely. This is why the shooting was unconstitutional. The sub-issue for this element is whether the suspect, based only on the facts the officer knew in that exact moment, posed an immediate, significant threat. And the sub-rule here is really restrictive. The threat has to be based on something concrete, like the suspect having a weapon or being involved in a crime that uses or threatens violence.
And the facts here just didn't support that.
Not at all. The application of the facts showed Hyman believed Garner was unarmed. He saw he was young and slight. And the crime was burglary. The court gets very specific on this point. It notes that the FBI classifies burglary as a property crime, not a crime of violence. They even cited statistics showing that only about 3.8% of burglaries actually involve violence.
So more than 96% of the time, it's not a violent encounter.
Exactly. And since the officer had no reason, no probable cause to think this particular suspect was dangerous, the massive intrusion of taking his life was not justified just to stop him from getting away after a property crime.
So after looking at both elements, necessity was met, but significant threat was completely absent. What was the court's final conclusion?
The court held that shooting an unarmed, non-dangerous suspect violates the Fourth Amendment. Because that second element, the significant threat element, was not met, the seizure was unreasonable. As a result, the Tennessee statute was declared unconstitutional, at least insofar as it allowed deadly force against fleeing suspects like Edward Garner.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. I want to test the limits of that threat element. Let's run a hypothetical. Imagine Officer Hyman responds. Same house, same time, same fence. But this time, the homeowner runs out of the house screaming, they're covered in blood, and they yell, "That guy inside just stabbed me."
Yeah.
The officer then sees the suspect fleeing. Would deadly force be permissible then?
Yes, without a doubt.
Why?
Because those new facts completely changed the analysis for the second element. They established probable cause of a significant threat. The suspect has now committed a violent crime, one involving the infliction of serious physical harm. That gives the officer probable cause to believe he's an immediate danger to the community. So if deadly force is still necessary to stop his escape, it would absolutely pass the constitutional test under Garner. It really shows how everything hinges on that second element. It's not just, can I catch him? It's, must I stop him right now? Because he is a danger.
That makes the distinction crystal clear. But this was not a unanimous decision. Justice O'Connor wrote a powerful dissent, arguing this new rule was too restrictive. What was the dissent's core argument for allowing deadly force in a case like this one?
The dissent focused almost entirely on the serious nature of nighttime residential burglary. Justice O'Connor argued that when someone forces their way into a home, especially at night, that act carries what she called harsh potentialities for violence. The officer on the scene has no idea what happened inside. The dissent also cited Justice Department stats showing millions of violent crimes happened during burglaries over the previous decade.
So their argument was that the crime itself is inherently threatening.
Essentially, yes. They argued that the public's interest in immediately catching a suspected burglar who they saw as inherently dangerous outweighed that suspect's interest in getting away.
So it was really a clash over how to assess risk. The majority focused on the known facts about this specific suspect, unarmed, slight, while the dissent focused on the potential danger inherent in the category of crime.
That's a perfect way to put it. And the majority ultimately decided that you have to judge based on the facts on the ground, and that the potential risk of a burglary didn't justify the certainty of death for a suspect who appeared to be non-threatening.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? The court made a drastic shift. It went from allowing deadly force against almost any fleeing felon to only allowing it against dangerous ones. It completely reshaped law enforcement.
And to wrap this up, let's turn this entire deep dive into an actionable checklist for you. If you ever face a fact pattern with police use of force, follow this diagnostic framework straight from Garner. the four-step Garner diagnostic. 1. Is this a seizure? Is the suspect stopped or killed by force? If yes, the Fourth Amendment applies. 2. Is the force deadly? Is it force that's likely to cause death or serious injury? If yes, you use this test. 3. Apply the two-part Garner test, and remember, you must satisfy both parts. Element A was force strictly necessary to prevent escape. Was it the last resort? And element B, the big one. Did the officer have probable cause to believe the suspect posed a significant threat of death or serious physical injury to the officer or others?
Based on a weapon or a violent crime?
Precisely. And then step 4 is your conclusion. If that second element, the threat element, is not met, for example, an unarmed person fleeing a property crime, then the seizure is unreasonable. It's a violation of the Fourth Amendment.
That is a very clear blueprint for analysis. Thank you for walking us through that.
Of course. And before we go, here's one final provocative thought for you to consider. When the Supreme Court made this decision in 1985, it pointed out that over 86% of police departments in the country had already adopted policies that were this strict, or even stricter. And the court found no evidence that crime had gotten any worse in those places. So it raises a big question. The Supreme Court sets the constitutional floor, the minimum standard, but how much higher should departmental policy rise above that floor to really achieve public safety and effective, trusted law enforcement? Think about that balance.